Hey, Barry Manning here. Welcome to the Friday edition of the Garden Report. And we have here to talk about the Celtics Heat series that was and what's next for Miami after four playoff series between these teams. Anthony Chiang, welcome in from the Miami Herald. Been wanting to have him on forever here, and he's finally here, straight from exit interviews down in Miami.
Yes.
Not the series we expected, Anthony, with the injuries. Or that it could have been, and I think this could have been a great series at full strength, but down Josh Richardson, down Jimmy Butler, by the end of it, down Hawkes and more. It just didn't have any potential to turn to anything here, especially with the level that the Celtics reached this season coming in. And I don't think Boston played a phenomenal series, but they just had to defend a little bit, execute offensively to the bare minimum, and they were going to come out of this series with a win in 5 games. And if it wasn't for that one historic shooting night Miami had, this could have been a sweep easily, as many predicted it to be. So no real surprises here out of this one, just because of the health.
Yeah, I mean, that was the story of the Heat season, pretty much. I mean, they had to use a franchise record 35 different starting lineups, so many different combinations. Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo, and Tyler Hero played 27 games together all regular season. Just so it was just all full of inconsistencies, different players in and out of the lineup at different times. And then that just continued in the playoffs. It got worse in the playoffs, right? Because Jimmy missed the entire first round. Terry Rozier was out. Duncan Robinson was a shell of himself. Duncan Robinson was very important to the Heat in the regular season. Obviously, as you mentioned, Jaime Hawkes was out for that final game, and Josh Richardson was out for pretty much the entire second half of the season. It was just, yeah, like you said, this series I think could have been competitive for sure if the Heat was healthy. I'm not saying the Heat would have won the series, but I think it would have gone longer than 5 games. But with those guys out, they really had no shot. It was probably a surprise of the playoffs game two that they even won that game with who they had available. And I know it took a franchise record amount of threes in a playoff game, and it was kind of the anomaly. But just impressive that they won one game, to be honest with you, because Boston is so good this season.
Yeah, and that singular Heat, man. I know you know that
Yeah,
from writing. I hate how it sounds. I
I
remember
know.
that
I'm
from my
sorry. I'm sorry. That's like drilled into me at this point.
yeah. No, I know, I can tell. I had that in college with the orange, but Um, it's interesting where they're gonna go from here, and I guess we can start with them and get on to some Celtic stuff later. The big thing, and I know you wrote about and you've talked about it, Jimmy Butler's extension. You know that this
Yeah.
is a guy who they've built their team around to this point. They've made multiple finals now around him, and he's had some unbelievable playoff performances. He's truly become one of the great playoff performers we've seen. But he's in his mid 30s, and he wants Jalen Brown money. It looks like
Yeah.
here. And you can't argue with that. The production to this point has been on par with anybody else in the league, but you saw the slippage this year. It goes from an all NBA guy to a guy who's not, who doesn't play as much. The regular season results aren't quite there, and it's a big reason that this team has been an 8 seed the last couple of years here. And that's tough. You know, you can dig yourself out of it with upsets and go on these
Yeah.
great runs, but you put yourself in a difficult position by being that kind of team during the year. And when you pay that kind of contract, it's going to be tougher to put a team around him at that point. So it's a grueling decision. More often than not, it feels like the teams just do it, as the
Right.
Celtics did with Brown, and not a similar situation, obviously, because of the ages, but still a difficult one to give that kind of money, that kind of cap commitment to a guy who you're not totally sure you want to do that for. And again, the age being the big difference here. How do you think this is going to play out with him?
To be honest with you, I don't know. It's gonna be a really interesting decision. I don't know if the Heat knows at this point. They don't have to make a decision pretty much until July at the earliest because the window opens July 7th, and they have technically, if Jimmy gets the extension he wants, they have until June 30th next year to get this done. Jimmy wants it before the season, and before the start of the season, as you would imagine. He wants it earlier rather than later. He's going to be 35 in September. He wants a 2-year extension at 100 and I think 16 million it is. It's basically adding a year to his current contract, right? Because he already is guaranteed next year at his salary for his current contract. He has a player option the following year. This extension that he wants would be ripping up that player option and it would start that season. So you're pretty much adding one more year to Jimmy's contract. at $60 million when he's 37 years old. That's a lot of money. Yes, it's just one more year, but that's a lot of money for a player who, like you said, this year he was good, but he wasn't all NBA, Jimmy, right? He missed 20 plus games. The playoffs he wasn't available. But like you said, if Jimmy's gonna make a case for this extension, he has a strong one. I mean, the Heat has been one of, you could argue they've been the most successful team in the East the last 4 years before this season because of Jimmy Butler. They've got the 3 Eastern Conference Finals, 2 NBA Finals. Obviously, they haven't won a championship, but this has been profit because of the Celtics' history. But this has probably been the second most successful era in Heat history. They haven't won a title, but they've been consistently making deep runs into the playoffs, and that's been because of Jimmy. So does the Heat give in and give him what he wants? Do they try to call his bluff and say, well, let's play out. You're under contract for at least one more year, guaranteed. Let's wait till the next offseason. And does Jimmy cause a mess if they do that? So it's going to be really interesting to see. And it's also going to give us an indication of what the Heat are thinking. If they give him that extension, that means the Heat is going all in with this build, right? They're going to continue to move forward with this build. Yeah, they'll probably change some of the pieces around Bam and Jimmy, but they're going to go all in with Jimmy and Bam as the core again. If they don't give it to him, that means they're pivoting probably, and it might be a new Heat, new look to the Heat roster. So I don't know how it's going to happen. I'm really intrigued to see what happens, but right now it's really too early to say one way or the other.
Yeah, I think there's 3 ways it could go. You kick it down the road, which probably is the most likely scenario, I'd imagine, just because it's easy to wait until that deadline at the very end that you mentioned there. I think it's more likely you extend him if you can add another piece here, and obviously they tried to do that last summer with Lillard, didn't work. I don't know who's gonna be available this summer. Obviously people are speculating with Durant and, who knows what's gonna happen with Giannis here. I'd imagine he's gonna be staying at least another year in Milwaukee. So you just don't know who's gonna be out there,
Yeah.
and obviously the whole Lillard thing, given the pieces the Heat had, didn't come together. So it's tough to say they would come together for another star at that point. And, if it is just going to be Butler, Bam coming back with a similar core here, and I know they hit on Hawkins, so maybe they can hit on another draft pick here, come back healthy, bring back Rozier for a full training camp. I think there's a lot of reasons you could say run this back and it'll go better next year. But how much better? And that's the question they're going to have to ask now. What is the ceiling for this team? Because even at their best, the last couple of years here, they ended up losing in the finals and losing pretty convincingly, to the Lakers in 2020 and then, of course, the Nuggets last year. So I think there's something to say about being in that mix and maybe something breaks your way and you end up being a champion. I think that's always something a team wants to be in position to do. But you also have to think a little bit about the long term, I think. And the tough question here with Butler is obviously they could trade him. But who would want him? And how much could you get for him at that point if you don't want to sign him long term, if you don't want to commit to that, super max money here? And it's tough to think about who would want him around the league, just given the age, given, you have bad teams that are probably want to rebuild around their, young core players, and you have good teams who have their guys, and he would have to fit in as probably a second or third piece on those teams. So I have a tough time thinking about anybody who would, not only want him, of course the team would want him, but want him at that price. And that's the tough position they're in here, is even if they don't want to do this deal, I don't know if they can get a ton for him if they want to move on.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the Heat is in a really tough spot because I think you take the emotion out of it. Probably the logical decision is don't give him that money and just kind of see how this plays out. Like you said, kick it down the road and maybe next offseason deal with it. But Jimmy might make a mess out of this if they do that, right? So it's just, you don't know. I mean, he's done that before, right? With Minnesota. You've seen him do that before. And the question is, like you said, Jimmy is still very good. But it has to be a team that feels like they're a Jimmy Butler away from winning a championship, right? Like that feels like they want to go all in right now, willing to cash in some chips to get Jimmy Butler. Again, I'm kind of with you where I think the most likely outcome, and just because it's probably the path of least resistance, is the Heat just gives him what he wants, right? And you kind of let this era play out. Again, it's just adding one more year. It's like a very expensive year, but just adding one more year to, it's not like you're paying him until he's 40 years old. It's adding one more season to his current contract. If I had to predict, I think I would predict that outcome, but I'm not. I wouldn't bet on it. That's for sure, because I could easily see it going the other way as well.
What do you make of the other pieces on the team here and what they'll do around Jimmy if they do keep that Jimmy Bam core intact? They obviously go out and trade for Rozier and
Yeah,
some up and down results there up until the injury and a weird injury that keeps him out this whole first round. I don't know what happened there, but he'll be back at least for another year here with 1 year left on his deal. So I'd have to imagine he'll be part of the core they build here. But you do have that hero piece that's been floated around a million times now. Some draft picks, I'm sure, as well here. Are they going to look to consolidate, go after another star, you think, or are they just going to try to keep building around this core? Jaquez, Jovic, who, factored into a playoff series
yeah.
here for the first time in year two, and then another draft pick potentially here. And they have drafted pretty well in recent history here. So it wouldn't be the worst way to go, but again, when you're going up against the Celtics and some of these top tier teams in the East, does that team have, conference winning ceiling to it right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think this team is always going to go for the star if there's one out there, right? I mean, they have a history of that. Whether they get him or not, that's a big question mark. But if Donovan Mitchell becomes available, let's say he wants out of Cleveland and Cleveland loses early in the playoffs,
It's a
that's
good
theory still
name.
going on, obviously. But that's one that's been linked to Miami for years. So I think that is one to watch, right? Depending on how the Cleveland, things go for Cleveland the next few weeks. Um, but I do think they'll. I mean, do they have the best assets in the NBA? No, but they have some pieces where if a star says I want to go to the Heat, they have enough pieces probably to get a trade done, right? With young pieces like you said with Jaquez, Jovic, they have a couple picks they could put in a deal. Um, Rozier, which I know he was out with the neck, but his contract is not a bad one, and it's coming up on expiring soon, and he's still a good player. And Tyler Hero, I know right now his stock is down, but again, there might be a team out there. He's still young, still in the right role, can be an effective player, is a good scorer. So they have pieces where they could put together a good enough package probably to get a deal like that done for a guy like Donovan Mitchell. But I think it's going to come down to that player saying, I want to go to the Heat. Because there are other teams out there that have better packages they can put together, whether it's the Knicks, right, or the Nets, who have all these picks and that have more assets than the Heat. So it's going to take, I think, both things where obviously he have to go after him, but also the player that's the star has to ask to go to the Heat. Kind of like what Damian Lillard did last year, but it just didn't work out in the end.
Is Rozier going to be okay? I know
I
he didn't
think
talk
so.
today.
Yeah, he didn't talk today, but I think he's gonna be okay. They're still going through some tests to kind of determine exactly what's going on with the neck. It's kind of unclear at this point. At first, I remember it happened, and he missed a game against an important game against the Pacers, and he said, "I just woke up on the I kind of woke up with some pain in my neck. I'll be fine next game." And then he went on to miss, like he didn't play after that, so it was kind of surprising. But it's a neck injury, right? So they're being really cautious with it. From what I hear, he should be fine next season. He should be fine to play. But there are still tests being done to determine exactly what's going on.
Yeah, because you're seeing some of the reporting. It's like, oh,
Yeah,
it's not career threatening, and you're like, huh? Like, you
yeah,
hear something like that, and you're like, oh, gee, like how bad was this? And it stinks he wasn't part of the series. Obviously, as a former Celtic and Richardson in it too, it could have been such a fun
yeah.
series at full strength. I feel like, especially given some of the series these teams have played in the past, but it ends up being pretty non-competitive. I want to hit on the Celtics and some of your impressions on them before we get out of here. Just a quick shout out first to our sponsor, Prize Picks. Head over to prizepicks.com/CLNS. Use that code CLNS to get up to 100% deposit match up to $100. Just pick two guys. It's our official daily fantasy sports partner here. Pick more or less on their stat projections, and you're off. Another round about to start here, either on Sunday or on Tuesday. Celtics Cavaliers, maybe Celtics Magic. It was fun seeing all these projections through round one, some big ones on Tatum. The Heat were able to hold him pretty low in terms of points there. So he ended up being a good guy more often than not to go less on this series. So try it out. There's more games tonight, more games every night pretty much here through the rest of the spring. Just use that promo code CLNS to support us here at the Garden Report and CLNS Media. Let's talk some Celtics, Anthony. What did you think of them? Obviously, the Heat, I think, held down their offense a little bit just based on what it was during the regular season. But defensively, they were able to lock down whether it was Porzingis in the middle there or Horford for that fifth game. And the pace was great, I felt like, even though he went down, and they were able to get into some of their bench units and produce. So overall, I was pretty satisfied here. It wasn't the best series for Tatum, just with how much attention the Celtics showed him, but he was able to turn into a passer and beat the Heat that way as well. So do they look like that definitive favorite to you just based on what you saw here in the series? Or do you still have some questions about them as they move forward here in the East?
I think they're the definitive favorite in the East for sure. I mean, especially with Milwaukee out, right? And the Knicks look like probably the team they might face in these conference finals, just based on what we saw in the first round. I think again, I just think Boston's talent is overwhelming. When it comes to if they get to the NBA Finals against a team like Denver or a team like Minnesota or Oklahoma City, I think that's going to be a competitive series. I think Boston, they're definitely better. I think the additions of Drew Holiday, Porzingis, if he can get healthy, make a huge difference. I mean, we saw it in the first few games with Porzingis. I mean, that kind of changed the equation in the matchup against the Heat. You really couldn't play zone much anymore. Just the switching and taking advantage of matchups with the Heat switching with Porzingis, his shooting, it changed a lot. So Porzingis can get healthy. I think that's obviously important. But they are historically the best offensive rating ever, I think, right? Is that right? In the regular season? Second best defense in the NBA. They were the best team in the NBA all regular season. So to me, considering I think the easy path to have in the East, I would put them down as a favorite to win the championship at this point, just because I think they do have the easiest path to get to the finals out of all the contenders, including the West teams.
Yeah, and that was great to see in round one, and that's a big reason I wanted to see them against the Heat.
Yeah.
Obviously, you had to get that zone matchup in and handle that, and they did to a point where the Heat couldn't use it consistently throughout the
They
series.
could not
As you
play it.
mentioned.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've never seen a team get the Heat out of zone quicker. Usually their zone is pretty effective because Eric Spoelstra does a good job of kind of morphing the zone based on the matchup and is able to change it based on different teams' strengths and how their offense. But they could never get it to work against Boston. That's because every lineup they have out there has 5 shooters, and that's really unique.
Yeah, and they did some interesting stuff. I mean, they tried to put Hero on Brown to absorb that matchup and get Brown shooting a ton and, I guess just slow down and put the offense in a one-dimensional spot, and that worked in game 2. I think the Celtics shot like 2 for 14 against Hero in that game and went at him over and over again to no avail, but you're right. They attack matchups. Kevin Love would come into these games, especially in game. Like it was crazy watching in Game 5 just how methodically they drove Love off the floor the instant he came out there. That's stuff they did all year, and obviously the Porzingis addition, by and large, was for the Heat. To have that layer to their offense against a zone and a defense like Miami's, and even though they benefited from Miami's poor health in this series, I think you saw shades of their offense being able to execute at a level that probably wins this series, even at full health, I feel like. And obviously, there's some
Yeah.
layers to a guy like Richardson being out there who's switchable and can guard all those positions. They really missed him here. Rozier would have been a much better option than some of the guards you saw in this series, certainly. And Butler's a guy who can steal a game on his own. So it's just so tough to take a ton from the series. But the offensive execution in spurts for Boston was really good here, even without Porzingis. And the interesting thing for them going forward without him is now they're 22-4 without him this year. Their offensive rating is actually a little bit better. They played faster in that game 5 without him, and they got out to that 37-point lead. So I think those are positives you pull from this series. And, I'll keep saying it with Tatum. I didn't love his play in this series, but he had a 10-assist game in game 1. He moved the ball well. He defended. I think he had 12 rebounds in game 5 as well. So he did all the other things. When you looked at the way the Heat were guarding him, it really was 2-3 guys lined up against him for a lot of this series, trying to force him to be a passer.
Yeah, and I think another encouraging thing is, like you said, I know it was against a watered-down Heat team, but they didn't shoot the 3-ball well in some of those games.
Right.
And the Celtics still won. I think that's been one of the knocks on the Celtics. Like, they're so dependent on the 3-ball. They, if they go cold, they can't really win. But their defense is great, obviously, as you know. And they did other stuff on offense to score enough points to get by the Heat. I know they didn't need to score that many points against this Heat team because he struggled to score, but I think that was encouraging that they were able to survive some. Again, it wasn't a great shooting like Boston has, done for most of the season. There were some games there where, they needed to do other things to win, and they were able to do it.
So here's my big question after 4 series in 5 years, 2 in a row here, 3 in a row actually. Is this the last we've seen of these two teams? Is this rivalry
No,
going to
never.
continue? So you see the Heat continuing to be relevant, continuing to be there in the playoffs with the Celtics team, and just figuring out a way to compete.
Yeah, I mean, is it always going to come in the Eastern Conference Finals? Probably no, right? But I think, yeah, I think the Heat are, just because of the makeup of the Heat, they're always going to try to win, right? They're always going to try to go for it. They're not a team that's going to take many steps back to rebuild. So yeah, I think there's a chance that the Heat and Celtics can meet up again next season or in a few seasons. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility. And if Jimmy is back next season, which again he's under contract for the Heat, so the chances are he will be back. I think in this East, the Heat should be a playoff team, right? So I don't think it's over.
What's
And
their biggest need? What's their biggest need? You feel like?
well, they need shooting. I know. I mean, they need 3-point shooting. It's essential around a roster built around Jimmy and Bam, which pretty much are two non-3-point shooters. Those are your two best players. It's very unique, right? Like a team's two best players don't shoot many threes. You need to have elite 3-point shooters around them. And I think this year, whether it was because of injuries or guys just not shooting well, they just didn't have enough of that. And I think that, I mean, you saw the offense. I think we finished the 21st ranked offensive rating, 2 straight years with a bottom 10 offense in the regular season. They got really hot in last year's playoffs, as you know, and as many people know, to make it to the finals. But that was, I'm not saying that was an outlier, but that was a 2-month run. And then this year, again, the 3-point shooting was up and down. So I think they need shooting. I think they need more size. We saw that again, in this series. I think they need more size. Bam as a center. I still think he's a center, but he's 6'9", right? So if you could have another big body to play next to him in certain matchups, I think that will help. And then I think you need probably another point guard on the roster, another ball handler. So they do have some needs they need to fill. But I think number one would be shooting, because this team needs to have a better offense out there. They can't keep just winning with a top 5, top 10 defense. They need to score points in today's NBA.
And as we record this, we're going to see a game 6 tonight between the Cavs and Magic. Obviously, the winner of this will move on to play the Celtics in round 2. What do you think of these two teams? How do you think they can end up challenging the Celtics here? Obviously, you probably saw bits and pieces of these teams throughout the year, just covering the Heat. What kind of challenge do they present? I actually feel like they're pretty similar teams. Coming out of round 1 here that the Celtics might see coming up.
Yeah, I mean, Orlando's defense was one of the best in the NBA all season, right? So I think that's the one way they could probably challenge Boston, is just kind of similar to the Heat, but healthier roster where their offense isn't great, but if they can muck up the game and make it a little low scoring and make it physical and kind of get the knock the Celtics offense out of rhythm. I mean, that's one way, I guess, but I just can't see either of these teams really competing with the Celtics, to be honest with you. I don't think it's going to be a long series. Cleveland I think has more talent, obviously, with Donovan Mitchell, and Evan Mobley and Jared Allen and former Heat player Max Strus and Darius Garland. So they have talent, but again, I just haven't. They've been so up and down this year. The offense has kind of been weirdly inconsistent, even though they have guys who could put some points up. So I really do. Yes, could either of those teams win a game or two? Sure. But even without Porzingis, I just can't see Boston having much trouble with Orlando or Cleveland.
I love that, though. Celtics Heat rematch and then Max Strus in round 2. It's like, oh, the Heat are behind us, and then he's popping up again.
Never. They're always there.
The Heat missed him and Vincent this year.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if they were going to, but Vincent was hurt all year, but Strus was awesome for Cleveland. I think either one of those guys, at least one of those guys staying in Miami, probably would have helped them this year. But they're probably expecting to be able to add a Lillard or something like that, and you end up with none of those guys this year. So that was a killer. They definitely took a step back this year. And that's, going to leave you at home here for the rest of the playoff race. I don't know
Yeah.
if you're happy or upset about that, but it's the reality.
Yeah, I mean, I've become so used to not like the season ending for me in either late May or early June. And this year I have an extra month, so I have some time to fill. But it's okay, right? It happens, and not every year can you go to the conference finals or the finals. So it was funny. Exit interviews today, Eric Spoelstra was like, I don't know what I'm gonna do with this time. We didn't plan for this. Like
Yeah.
I'm not used to this. None of us know what we're gonna do for the next 3-4 weeks.
I know
So
Curry was talking
it
about
is
that too.
different.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's different. It's different for sure.
Well, 15th overall pick. That's not a terrible spot to be. I know it's a shaky draft by most, assessments here, but he'd have made the most of that. So that's what they'll be looking forward to off season as well. There in the past, Celtics finally get through that Heat team after last year's bizarre East Finals, and do so pretty handily here. Anthony, good talking to you throughout this series. Appreciate you hopping on here. Probably talk to you sometime early next season. Enjoy the summer.
Sounds good. Thanks, man. Have a good one. Good luck the rest of the way.
All right. And before we get out of here, obviously about to go watch Cavs Magic. We're going to have a series preview coming at some point this weekend if it is the Cavs that win tonight. So stay tuned for that. Obviously, plenty of preview on both sides coming your way tonight. If there's a game 7, looking at what both of these teams could bring to the Eastern Conference semifinals here. So stay tuned for that as well. And we'll see what happens in game 6 here tonight. Again, 7 o'clock tip. So this will be starting just any minute now. I don't think we'll be going live tonight. So stay tuned for something tomorrow, probably, to preview the series if it is going to be Cavs Celtics here. And it'll get started on Sunday. So a pretty quick turnaround here if the Cavs take care of business tonight. They'll be heading right from Orlando to Boston directly if they win this one tonight. But of course, Magic are favorited tonight. They're at home. They've won every game in this series at home. So there certainly could be a game 7 on Sunday that forces the Celtics to wait until Tuesday for this next series to begin. We, of course, are also brought to you by Game Time. Love Game Time. I've used them even before they became a partner here on the Garn Report. And it's the best place to get tickets right up to and even after the start of these games. That's why it's called Game Time. Just pick out matchups, games, playoff games certainly going on right now too that you'd like to attend. This game 1 will be coming up 1 o'clock on Sunday if the Cavs take care of business tonight. So Sunday afternoon, you feel like getting a last minute ticket, you could save up to 60% last minute on sports, but also concerts, comedy, theater. I got a nice concert coming up next week here in Boston. We're going to try to check out Game Time for some deals on that. Getting over at the MGM there at Fenway next week. So save even more when you choose a section. Let Game Time choose the seats. You can toggle through front, and there's no surprise fees at checkout. That's the big thing. Panoramic view of your seat. That's one of my favorite things I've always loved about Game Time here. So just download the app, create an account, and use the code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Of course, terms apply. Just create an account and redeem the code CLNS. That's the important part. Use the code CLNS for $20 off. Of course, that's for first-time users only. CLNS. Spell it out. Redeem that code at checkout. Get $20 off your first tickets over at Game Time. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. That's the Game Time app. Great partner here at the Garn Report. And that's our show for tonight. I'm going to go watch Cavs Magic right now. I want the Cavs to take care of business tonight. I don't want to be sitting around here for 5 more days. We'll, of course, have more practice coverage tomorrow. Joe Sway and I were over there today. Interviews are up now over on CLNS Media. So check all that out from today. And that's our last word on Celtics Heat. It's over, 4-1. Celtics took care of business here, and I'll give them credit for doing that. They did a great job in this series, just blowing by them and taking care of business. I know Al had some comments about that today as well, that they weren't able to do that last year against the Hawks. This year, they get it done. So that's it. I'm Bobby Manning. Good talking to you guys here tonight. Enjoy your weekends, and hopefully we'll see you here on Sunday with a post-game Garn Report. Stay tuned, of course, for a series preview as well. I'll grab some of the guys together to talk about the Cavs if they win tonight. And that's it. Stay tuned for this. We might do this tomorrow. more Kendrick Drake talk on Dome Theory. Of course, check out my show, Dome Theory, here on CLNS Media as well. Appreciate you, man, talking about that and tuning in when we do go live, me and the guys over there. So we'll have that for sure this weekend as well. I think we're planning on tomorrow, probably around 5 o'clock. So, yeah, might be some double-barreled action tomorrow between Dome Theory and a Cavs Magic post-game, Cavs Celtics series preview tomorrow. So we'll be busy this weekend. But that's it for tonight. Enjoy the game, everybody, and we'll talk to you soon.